Hello, everyone. Welcome to Film Music Media's Midsummer Music Matinee. My name is Savas. I'm the founder of Film Music Media, and we have another amazing panel of guests here tonight, or this afternoon, actually. So let's jump in and meet our guests. First up, we have film and TV composer that recently worked on Disney Plus's Let's Be Tigers. Please welcome Tangelene Bolton. Hey, Tangelene.
Thanks, Kai. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Next, we have a composer who previously worked on Smallville, Vampire Diaries, and the recent short, The Lady Edison. Please welcome Greg Nicolett. Hey, Greg.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Next, we have a film and TV and video game composer who recently worked on the comedy Domino, Battle of the Bones. Please welcome Shaun Chasin.
How's it going, guys?
Hey. And last but not least, we have the composer and co-founder of Voodoo Tracks Latin Music Library. Please welcome Elias Serpa.
Hi, Kaya. Thank you for inviting us.
So let's, I want to jump in. This will be for everyone. We'll go down the line and we can all add our insight. I want to start off with kind of the central question of this panel, which is composing story driven, or does the story drive the score? So as in, does what you see on screen dictate the musical approach, or is the function more to kind of, go in there and the role to take us inside a character and tell us what is not seen, which of course I'm sure will depend on each project and might have, feet in both camp, but I'm just curious what approach you prefer and how you kind of see the role, the role of music in driving a story, or the story driving the music. So let's start with Tangelene. Why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, I love both approaches. I think it totally depends on the project. And, if you can do some really fun stuff to get into the character's mind and kind of influence the viewer, that can be a lot of fun. But I think it's totally situational, and you have to make sure that you're doing justice to the story overall.
Yeah, absolutely. Elias, how about you? What is your take on it?
I think as much as it can be a situation to situation, I think it also depends on the personal style. I think, certain types of movie ask for more of like a mood score than something that's, driven by the actual things that we're seeing in the screen. So I think it's, in my work at least, it's a 50-50 split. Sometimes it's just, carrying on the tone or setting up some general mood.
Yeah, absolutely. Shaun, how about yourself?
Yeah, I think really the power of what we do is that it can be both, and it's finding that interplay and that balance between, holding back and letting a story unfold and just, being present for it, and then also telling something that was not told already. And I think that the fact that we can do both and choose is really the kind of the power of what we do.
Yeah, definitely. Greg, how about yourself?
Yeah, basically agree with everything that's been said so far. I would add that since I've been doing a lot of kids animation these past 5 years, it definitely changes a bit of the way that I approach things, just because one of the things that the executives and the writers are really keen on is making sure the kids understand certain story beats. So certainly in those cases, the music is probably even tighter to story, like sort of announcing jokes, announcing plot points in a way that we don't necessarily do with, a movie like Dune or something like that, where it's more about the world building and just the mood, as Elias was saying.
Absolutely. But I also try to come at it, because I'm not actually a composer. I come at it completely differently. I work in animation as well, but whether I was through film school or am I writing something, like music drives everything that I do from the script phase onwards. And I know that you also have to deal with temp tracks, which is a whole different discussion of like structuring scenes. So it is a weird circle where music can drive a story even before it even reaches the composer, and then you take the wheel and be like, all right, let's take this car and drive it even further. I think it's an interesting combination of both, just like kind of everyone mentioned. But I want to kind of go back around the room with everybody and kind of pitch this idea. So if you receive a script for a project, what do you usually start working on, and how does the narrative and characters inspire your sound palette for the project? So I guess essentially, where does that first note come from? I like to ask composers that question. Like, what is kind of that point that you start at to kind of pull that first idea out? How about Greg? How about you start us off on this one?
Sure. So it does, like we've been saying, and I'm sure we'll say this a lot, it does depend on the project, but something that I like to do a lot lately is really find a concept for the score, something that's not really musical at all, but something that I can easily sort of talk about to the director, who may or may not like talking about music directly, right? And also something
Right.
that might give me some ideas, jumping off points that I might not otherwise have thought of on my own without that concept. And so a good example was a short that I just did called The Lady Edison, which was a period piece set in the 19th century about a female inventor, Margaret Knight, who's a real person, and she built these big, beautiful industrial machines. And so I was thinking, well, I want it to sound sort of period, but I also want it to sound mechanical and driven. I wanted to reflect sort of the machines that she makes, but also her drive. And I also wanted sort of a modern element to it because she's an inventor. She's on the cutting edge. So all of those ideas sort of ended up translating into the score itself, which had a bit of a period flavor because it was all sort of built around a cello, basically, played by Rowan, by the way, who's fantastic. And even though it was sort of technically on an older instrument, the music I was having them play was very repetitive. It had a lot of drive to it, added some distortion on the parts in certain areas of it. So it had a bit of a modern vibe mixed with that older period specific flavor, and it worked out great. I think it definitely brought me into areas creatively that like I said, I wouldn't necessarily have gone if I didn't, think about it from that extra musical place.
Absolutely. No, that sounds amazing. Shaun, how about yourself? What is kind of your starting point and your kind of to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, so I think the first impression is such a powerful kind of thing, and the fact is you only get one, and the longer you're working on a project, the
Right.
more the intention of the story or the intention of the score becomes about what you're choosing to make it. So I think it's so important the first time you see a rough cut or the first time you read a script is just to get something out, some kind of music, whether or not you show the director or anything, just to get that first impression down of what your sense of what it's about, really. And I think from there you can change that all day long, but that first sense I think is really important to just get out as soon as possible.
Would you say that you kind of react to it do you try to watch it kind of from an audience point of view,
Yeah,
or do you
yeah.
or do you think of it as a storyteller, like you are the filmmaker? Or do you put yourself in the audience seat first?
The first time I like to just be an audience member, just
Okay.
let it happen and see. Yeah.
Absolutely. Tangelene, how about yourself? What is your approach?
I love reading scripts,
Yeah.
and it's fun because you can kind of get a sense of the character's personality really well. And I love to start writing themes as I'm reading the script and getting a sense of character's personality, as well as like the space that I'm in. What's my environment looking like? Am I outside? Am I inside? Is the building large? Is it a house? And how can I craft my characters around the spaces that I'm in as well?
Absolutely. Do you ever like when you read a script for the first time and then you see maybe the first footage or the first shots, do you go like, oh, that's not what I was thinking, like, at all? Is it ever like do you like, oh, I got it wrong, I gotta like readjust?
A little bit. And I think that's why it's important to make sure you have that dialogue going with either a director or showrunner, so you can get extra insight as you're reading the script. Because sometimes characters might be bringing something different to their performances, which might not have been reflected in the script. So I think that's a really fun part, is getting the dialogue going beforehand, and then taking a look at dailies, getting extra inspired then.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so Elias, how about yourself? What is your approach and your starting point?
I think you mentioned something really important, which is the fact that how much some of these projects change from page to screen, and
Yeah,
that's something that's if you're starting early on and you're just reading the script, I like to like scribble things like in certain areas or scenes of thoughts or music that I'm imagining while I'm reading it. It kind of, I don't know, I'm kind of picturing the people saying the lines and I'm just like writing stuff down. Sometimes I go back to those and I'm like, oh, well, it seems like every time these two guys are in this situation, this is the kind of music I'm hearing. But yeah, sometimes when you see what's shot, then you're like, oh, this is way, grittier or was way lighter than I anticipated this. And then you're like, oh, maybe I gotta take it up a notch in, trying to, complement the tone of the film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know
So
about you guys, but something about the look of the film, the colors, even the color correction, like if the whole film has sort of a blue
yeah,
cast to it, might change the sounds that I hear. Does anybody else relate to that?
Absolutely.
yeah, I think color
Definitely.
palette is such a driving
Yeah.
aspect. I was just I was doing liner notes for an album. I can't say what it is yet, but we're talking with the director and just how the color palettes moved the music, and from warm to cool, and the instrumentation and all that. It's such a, it's so tied together. And there's a thing where like some people actually hear in colors, right? I don't remember the term of that, but
Synesthesia, I think, right?
that's it. Yeah, like I think Pharrell Williams like says he has that, and some other people. So I think that's always an interesting thing. Yeah. So I want to jump to Tangelene. So Tangelene, the beginning and end of a scene is important for moving the story forward. Were the decisions you made on Let's Be Tigers influenced by discussions with the director about the script, or any other aspects of pre-production or production?
Yes. I had a lot of early discussions with my director, Stephanie, and she did a great job of describing kind of the overall tones of the film. I feel like using a lot of adjectives to describe scenes is so helpful for me. And I always try to advise creatives that I work with who aren't involved in music to talk with adjectives, not music.
Yeah.
And she would say stuff like, fuzzy, warm, wood tones, toys. How do toys communicate with music? And we actually got to take a look at our production designer's lookbook beforehand. So that gave me so much insight into how things were going to look. There was like a lot of pink tones, warm tones, fuzziness, playfulness. And yeah, that really informed my creative decisions with composing early on and getting my sonic palette going with like piano, cello, warm tones.
Yeah. And I always find it because I think it's fascinating that you all are essentially translating. You're speaking a different language that the director may or not speak, and they're describing what they need for the scene. But I'm curious, like for you, you had to learn the language first. So when was like that first time where you're like, I need fuzzy music, and you're like, fuzzy music? What the heck is fuzzy music? Like, did it take a while before you kind of had like a built up palette of being able to understand those words and be like, oh yeah, I know what fuzzy is. I know what cool is, or crisp, or all these. Do you kind of know off the top of your head exactly what kind of instruments pop into your head when those words come up?
I know what you mean, because some of these words are so nuanced. That was actually another word that she said was nuance. So that was, I love that word. I think that the difficult thing, but also the fun thing, is realizing that a lot of words can actually have like one global meaning. Like fuzzy, it can mean fuzzy, but it does mean warm and cozy. So
Right.
I interpret it more as like, what's like the global effect we want from a bunch of these really specific words.
Absolutely. No, yeah, for sure. Greg, I want to jump over to you. Can you talk about the difference between composing scores that work directly with the scene versus scores that are more about setting a film's overall tone, like maybe something more atmospheric or dissonant, like versus a little bit more stitched closer to the edit?
Yeah, although it's interesting, I kind of see it as the opposite, where the scores that are more atmospheric are further from the edit. But I guess I'll talk about why. I definitely, and I'm not sure if everybody else feels this way, but when people talk about composing to the story, I kind of think that we're sort of looking at the scene beat by beat. We're tracing the dramatic arc. We're considering each character's motivations. We're very much in the details, right? And that can be very important and very helpful in certain kinds of projects. But what I think the power is in sort of pulling back and thinking about tone and mood is that the score can kind of become its own independent entity. And I think that's something that I've learned a lot from studying scores from people like Hans Zimmer and Philip Glass, whose music I kind of see as kind of floating above the film and kind of in its own space, almost like it's like draped over the film, and sort of and it's sort of like it's providing a mood, it's providing providing a sense of place. Or Tangelene was talking about the size of a building. It's telling me things about the world around me, and so in a way it almost becomes world building in and of itself. I find that really interesting, and it's something that if I see an opportunity for it, I try to take it, just because, again, the kind of music that you write in that mind space is just so different.
Absolutely. Do you think that like scores like that, they maybe stand out, also maybe stand out stronger on as a listening experience away from the movie as well? Do they make it better, like soundtrack experience or something like that?
I guess it depends. A lot of those scores that I'm sort of thinking of tend to be a little more minimalistic.
Mhm.
And so even though they're beautiful and they have a lot of depth to them sonically, I don't know. Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because somebody like
Yeah.
John Williams he's both very much in the details, but also manages to write music that stands alone on its own. And I don't know how he's who he
Yeah,
is.
it's I like that you brought John Williams into
Yeah.
it because it's like, yeah, when you listen to John Williams, it's like, okay, that's it. It can't be anything else but Star Wars. It can't be anything else
Right.
besides Indiana Jones.
Right.
Where
So
it's
he's got
like,
both. Somehow he does everything
exactly,
at
but
once. So,
then you can
yeah.
hear like Marion's theme, and that's just like the most beautiful like character
Right.
thing, you know. It's just
Right.
like wonderful. Shaun, I want to talk to you. So what are some differences that you have noticed when working on a film or working on a video game? Anyone else with game experience also feel free to jump in as well. Like, what are the differences? I've talked to a lot of composers and working on both camps. I'm curious what your perspective is.
Yeah. So I think right off the bat, one of the big fundamental differences is that in a film, obviously the moments will happen at the same time for every viewer. At this minute, at this frame, the door opens, and that will play out the same way for every single viewer. So your music can exist as this static linear thing that is in that place. And a game is, as much as some games are fairly linear stories, though the actual experience itself of the gameplay never unfolds that way, and it's always a non-linear kind of experience. And so the problem becomes finding ways to support player action, even though players might take drastically different amounts of time to do things, or they might do things out of order. So it's just kind of that problem solving part of video game music that makes it so interesting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, like, do you even, when you hand over music to a game, because it kind of, you give it to the developers and they sort of kind of designing like the, what triggers, the more exciting music, or maybe the, battle music, whatever.
Yeah.
When you first see your music kind of being incorporated, is it kind of like a new thing to you, like, oh, that's how it's working, like, or do you kind of know how it's going to be?
Hopefully not. Yeah,
No?
hopefully
Okay.
it's a discussion going in as how this ought to
Right.
be implemented, and then it's designed with that in mind. And so then usually I like to either be able to play a build of the game and screen cap, or get screen cap from people, and then get things like average play times for areas from QA, where you can say, like,
Yeah.
this forest will take an average of 7 minutes to walk through. And so then if your asset list is saying, like, that forest is not that important, we just need like a 30-second ambient loop, and then QA is like, well, we spend 40 minutes in there, then a 30-second loop is going to be terrible. And so it's kind of a little bit of an optimization problem of finding out not just what initially is placed and works, but kind of tinkering over time and making sure that, like, that low health loop got really annoying. Maybe we have to
Right.
have that fade out over time, even though you haven't gotten health, just because there's not health in this area, or stuff like that. Just kind of the constant tinkering and the constant changing to make something, feel organic.
Yeah, as a gamer, I appreciate that, because if I'm stuck in a place and that loop hits
Nothing
that
worse.
30-second mark, and it's just like,
Yeah.
God, start digging into your brain. But no, there's so much going at the word nuance. There's so much nuance in gaming and stuff where you have to. I mean, I think it's such an interesting approach for sure.
Kaya, can I add
Yeah,
something to
jump
that?
in. Yeah.
The game that I'm working on or wrapping up, it's called Postgenomics, and it was an interesting situation because the game developer really loves strong themes, right? But they were also really excited about dynamic music, and I just wanted to sort of point out that there's sometimes a conflict between those two ideas. If you have music that's constantly changing with player interaction, then having a melody that is through composed can be a little harder, because changing it dynamically would then interrupt that melody constantly, right? And so that's also something you have to think about, is what kind of music am I writing for this particular moment? Can it be dynamic? Or does it have to play out in a certain length of time? Anyway, I thought that was an interesting sort of conundrum to sort through, and we had to kind of talk through
and I'm sure the type of game too, whether it's a first-person shooter, open world, or strategy, I'm sure that all dictates what kind of music is needed and how it's going to be incorporated and how the player experiences it. I mean, there's so much that changes not just the genre, but just the type of game as well. For sure. So Elias, I want to jump over to you. Can you talk about working on a feature film version of the short film Freebirth? How will the the work you did for the short film expand in the feature film, and what was the score's function in this project?
That's a very interesting project I did for the Halloween shorts.
Yes.
The little short run that Hulu does. So it's challenging. And Greg can chime in, and all of you guys, since you've been working in shorts as well. You have a very limited span of time to kind of get to the point, and to drive. In this case, I think it usually to drive the story. In this particular project, I was tasked with creating some very tense music for the contractions this lady was having, and that was like kind of that needed to signal something. And I think that's something that I'm looking forward to exploring in the feature film, since there are going to be way more situations and more characters to deal with. This was more of like setting up the mood and then going to the conclusion. And I think the palette of sounds probably going to stay the same and some of the main ideas, but I'm excited to explore all the other plots and subtext to the whole feature.
That's amazing. That's such an incredible, it's such a unique thing to do. Yeah, absolutely. So I want to jump around the room again. And so I'm curious, as a composer, how you keep the audience engaged. How do you keep them as you move between scenes, as the narrative progresses? How do you make sure you're not losing them? How do you make sure that they're still pulled into the characters, caring about the characters? Is it just about making sure that the motifs and themes come in at the right places to trigger kind of an emotional response? I'm curious what you think about how do you keep kind of audience retention in a sense, especially I think working with a short is also interesting too, because that's a shorter time period to keep people engaged versus a feature, also gaming as well. So I'm just curious what everybody's perspective is. So Tangelene, why don't you kick us off with that?
Sure. Well, I think in like a feature or TV setting, in addition to having strong motifs for characters, on the contrary to that, having a varied sonic palette too. So making sure you're adding interest when we're in like a new location or reoccurring locations, that those have a very distinct sonic palette, and as well as their specific themes, and also having maybe certain instruments for like interesting sync points. We don't have to always have a motif. You can also use a certain instrument to like evoke an important part of the plot, in addition to strong motifs.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, how about yourself? What is your kind of take on keeping audience engaged in the story?
I guess I'll talk about games for a second too, just because
Sure.
my head is in this game space right now. That's all I'm doing. And one of the things that I was thinking a lot about, and Shaun, maybe you'll agree, is and you were talking about it earlier about the 30-second loop in that forest. Is it too short? Is it too long? Is just not annoying the player, right? Again, with that strong theme sort of idea that we're going with, melodies are awesome, and they're what can kind of brand something and make a project memorable. But if you hear the same melody over and over and over and over again for 18 minutes, because it's just that one track, I mean, that can be, it can get pretty annoying faster than an ambient track would, which your brain isn't latching onto it as directly. So it's almost, sometimes you want to, in a way, in games you kind of want the audience to forget about the music for a while, just because you want to have another moment be bigger or more important, and so you need the music to kind of fade into the background. With film or TV, I don't know. I mean, I think my biggest guide is probably the director. I mean, I can try as much as I can to put myself in the shoes of the audience, but at the end of the day, I'm too far in it. I mean, I used to try to while composing really sort of like listen closely and see if I was being taken out of it, but then I would write very ambient music, just very simple, inoffensive music, I like to call it, right? Like it will not bother anybody, but it may not also be the most inspiring choice for a scene. So lately I've kind of just been saying, just go for it, do what you think sounds cool. And as long as the director's into it, and all the other powers that be, then kind of just sort of hope that the audience will go along with the ride. Just one quick story. When I was just starting out, I did have an opportunity to sit through a test screening of a short that I did. And it was called The Small Assassin. It's based on a Ray Bradbury short story, and it's about a baby that kills its parents. So we're already in some sort of cheesy territory potentially here. Right. There was a moment that I was asked to add a cue, very sinister sounding cue, and the baby was staring at the parents. And I was like a little bit like, I don't know, I think this is a bit much. Sure enough, when that cue played in the audience, the entire audience burst out laughing, which was not the desired result of that cue. And I don't know, it's not a good feeling. So sometimes test screenings can be a big help.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, thanks for sharing that, because
Sure. Well,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Sean, how about yourself? What is your take on all of this and keeping the audience engaged throughout the whole narrative?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough thing, and in general, I think we might all agree that it's easier to get in than it is to get out.
Yeah.
Where kind of once you're in, you can kind of keep going all day long, but then like, how do you, and you can get in on a cut, you can get in on a word, you can get in on something, but then to get out can sometimes be a nightmare, where you're like, I need to be out by here, but then where is it on this word? And then it's too abrupt, and then you don't want to just tail out over like 20 seconds or something. And so I think that just viewing what has worked in the past for other things can be such a powerful motivator, where you watch, we were talking about John Williams, you watch John Powell, Hans Zimmer, and seeing how they do these things, and how it just becomes this natural thing where the music becomes so married to picture that you hear it and you say, of course it is, of course it couldn't be any other way. The big example that I feel like I always come back to is The Matrix, and like Don Davis's score, where you hear a second of that music and you watch it with the picture, and it's just like the most perfect thing that could have existed for that movie, and we were talking about, inoffensive music and music that you notice, and I don't know that I notice when music comes in that movie. And with people who are writing at this level, they seem to have a way of just kind of existing naturally that I think we're all chasing. But yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I did the liners for the new Varese thing for The Matrix, the complete edition, and I interviewed Don for that, and just hearing his whole experience with that. I mean, he's the one who came up with that kind of modern minimalism. Like the Wachowskis didn't really have a kind of a take on what the music should be, and he's like, no, let's try this. And I don't think it's been replicated since then. Like no one has been able to, even the new Matrix, like not working. Like I don't know, that's just my opinion, but like, I mean, Don's on a whole different level. I mean, it was brilliant for sure. Elias, why don't you take us on your whole take on this?
I mean, you made a question earlier that was very interesting about the ins and outs, and when and continuing with Sean's comments about getting out of the scene. Like I think looking at the pacing of the entire piece helps me a lot. There's parts of a movie where there's a lot of information being told, and those moments tend to grab the people's attention. They're like trying to follow the plot. What is this character like? And then there's other areas in where it's about sitting with the situation, or what happened after they fought or whatnot. And I think those are the moments where the music can pretty much bridge those gaps and help with the pacing and make it feel fluid. And that's been my experiences. Of course there are scenes that need music, but sometimes there are scenes that it could very much work without. And when I'm starting out with a new project, I usually ask the first cut that I get to be without any temp, so I can kind of take an idea and see like, well, I think at this point they lost me, and that's like I was already checking my phone or whatever, right. And it's like this is somewhere that's crucial, and then my dog wants to say hi. So I come on, pal. All right, let's jump on in and say hello.
It's a cameo. We need a cameo. Oh, there we go.
There we go. All right. So I think that's what's crucial. I think paying attention to the pacing of the movie could inform very much where the music should come in and come out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you ever get like a pushback from filmmakers when they say, I don't want to hear the temp, or they're like, oh yeah, absolutely, here's a temp free cut? Or do they want you to listen to the temp so that you can,
I haven't had somebody say like, I'm not going to send it without temp. They usually do. And I mean, then they're very, I think one of my first projects was like a silent film, and they had absolutely no temp whatsoever. And it's like, well, we want music wall to wall. It's like, what? Like you got to give me something to hold on, Right. But it turned out really great. I feel that when you watch something without music, it really if it works tightly without music, then your job is so much more about enhancing the story. If it's not working without, then you're the plumber there. You're just like, oh, I gotta fix this, and this needs to go there. You turn into that person.
That's true. I think composers can have to be the fixer, the closer sometimes, where like, oh, this is not working. But you can make a scene work with music. I've seen it done. It's like, oh yeah, this is amazing. But then you go back and like, oh wait, was that really that good? No. It's like,
I mean,
so. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going back to John Williams, if you watched the scene where Ray goes up, meets Luke Skywalker, have you seen that one without any score? You're like, that doesn't work without any score. It's like it does. This world, the island, the little, and like it's so magical with what John did there. It's just a must.
Absolutely. So I want to go around the room again and just want to ask everyone, is there a favorite scene or maybe a character? We're talking about driving stories, and I think if there's a sequence or a certain character from a project that you did that kind of is your favorite, that kind of was really creatively rewarding, that kind of stuck with you musically, and what you kind of did with that. So I'm just curious if there's anything that kind of comes to mind. Tangelene, is there anything from a character standpoint or a scene that from your project that really just kind of like was a blast to do and stands out?
Yeah, on a most recent project, but I can't talk about it yet. So, but I don't. Yeah, like I can't NDAs. Yeah, but I guess what I can say is just overall, it's super rewarding to feel that you've like completely done the character justice, especially if you can, start reading early in the script.
Yeah.
And I guess whatever emotion it is, to feel like you're doing the character justice.
And to essentially, like, I guess, you end up painting a musical portrait of the character, right? So, you really have to like find their emotion, find their motive, find their weaknesses, and just flesh it out. I'm sure that's challenging, but also super rewarding once you crack it. Greg, how about yourself? Is there something, a standout moment from one of your recent projects that really kind of hammers in story driving?
Yeah, well, it's not totally recent, but I did a short a while back called Neighbors.
Yeah.
And one of the characters, she's an agoraphobe, and so she's afraid to leave her apartment. And she has a bit of a childlike vibe to herself throughout the film, because since she's alone all the time, she's sort of in her own world and kind of, having to entertain herself, and there's just nobody around. And I was writing, I wrote a theme for her apart from the movie, and then when I placed it on the scene, just sort of magically, she was humming in the scene, and I didn't plan it this way, but the theme worked perfectly with the humming that she was doing from the production sound, and it probably impacted me subconsciously, but it kind of just came together in this beautiful, unexpected way, and it's a little moment that I don't think anybody will notice, but for me, it was sort of like, wow, this is a beautiful, like, accidental synesthesia of
that's amazing.
All these elements coming together. So, yeah.
Incredible. Elias, how about yourself? Anything standing out?
I worked. I think it was November when it aired. There was this PBS documentary that I worked on that featured, very very warm story about this LGBTQ Latinos that founded their own party out of necessity. And when they came to me with this documentary, it there's so much heart in the story, but it's about a party and a club. So it was like a very interesting merger of things that I needed to sound Latin, I needed to be loud and party like, but then there was all this other drama behind it, and all and a beautiful community most of all. And I think that was a very fun project to work at, and it was very challenging because of the breadth of the kind of music they needed.
Yeah.
But it was a ton of fun. I think it's airing on KSET and PBS online. Anybody wants to catch.
Oh wow, that's amazing. That's fantastic. Shaun, how about yourself? Was there something that pops out for you?
Yeah. So on Domino, which is a comedy starring Snoop Dogg and David Arquette, and it's about like a domino tournament in Compton, but some of it is played up like it's like a 1990s inspirational sports movie. And there's this part where there's like a robbery attempt at the domino tournament, and so all the characters think the tournament's going to get shut down, and everyone's like, maybe we should just go home. And then David Arquette's character stands up and is like, no, we can't give up, and gives this like big rousing speech. And like, I saw the cut and I was like, I want to score this like a Jerry Goldsmith, sports movie rousing speech. And they were kind of like, fine, let's do it, kind of thing. And so, yeah, we got to just, huge sound. And you mentioned Rowan earlier. They were all over that score. And yeah, it's just a super fun moment once in a while when, you get allowed to write music,
I'm glad we both have trouble saying their name. I gotta practice that. Rowan.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, they're great. They're so great. I'll have to check that out.
Absolutely. So you're all just, grinding and working away and then turning out such amazing work. But composers in the industry, I think especially anybody in the industry, whether you're working in music or whether you're working, in cinematography or set design, I feel like creative burnout is such a real thing. So I'm curious how you all balance work and life and being able to try to tackle projects and keep climbing, keep trying to put yourself out there, but also doing work, making sure you have enough time to do work that you feel that you've dedicated enough time to, but also have time for family and friends. So I'm just curious, how do you manage creative burnout? How do you manage keeping it all together? How do you keep sane and all this craziness? So is there any secrets that you've figured out so far? If not, if so, please share it with everyone. So Tangelene, how about yourself? How do you manage everything?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important to like determine what kind of burnout it is.
Yeah.
Like if it's burnout after like a whole year of doing a bunch of projects at once, I feel like that's a different type of burnout than, oh, I'm burnt out because I need to deliver something tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
So if it's like one of those long streak burnouts, I need to like do nothing for as long as possible. Like if I have a break, I just tell myself, okay, like do nothing, watch some reality TV. And I need to like recenter so I can fully absorb what I'd been doing for that time, or like what planet I was on for that long period of time. But if it's something where I have a scene to deliver or a bunch of cues to deliver the next day and I'm working on a specific scene and I'm burnt out and I can't think of something creatively, sometimes switching to a different instrument physically helps me. So if I'm playing like piano and like not MIDI, not just switching to a different MIDI instrument, but maybe switching from piano to guitar or something else. And I noticed that everyone has a bunch of awesome instruments behind them.
Yeah,
so,
you all have amazing instruments behind you.
So I think that helps a lot because you kind of open your brain to a new set of challenges that you need to kind of get through, and it's helpful.
Absolutely. Greg, how about yourself? How do you deal with creative burnout?
Yeah, I totally agree with Tangelene about the different types of creative burnout. One type, I guess, that I'll talk about is having worked on a few series now and sort of getting to the third season, the like 60th episode or whatever, and that's a certain kind of burnout as well because you've everything's established, the themes are established. There's no more sort of tension with the director, like, are we going to get it right? Are we not? Right? Everything's kind of just humming along, and that in a way can kind of be almost a creative death, right? If you let that sort of what's the word, routine kind of get the better of you, and you just go on autopilot. So trying to inject something fresh into your music, even if it's just well, I'm going to mix this one a little differently, or I'm going to throw in an unexpected turn here that I have a feeling might get rejected, but I still think it could be worth the risk, and it'll give me something interesting to do for the day. Is important. It's important to sort of find ways to take risks when you're in that space of just so much repetition. And then as for sort of the other burnout that I deal with, I would say it's demo fatigue, and which is just all. I don't know how if you guys experience this, but just the like you get to a certain point in your career and you're getting a lot of auditions through your manager or your agent, and it was always a problem that I knew I wanted to have, but boy, it's definitely hard to deal with, like just because all of us who do this are going to get rejected the majority of the time, right? So how we manage that rejection has to become sort of part of our daily practices, and I can't say I've really figured out the best way through that, except for to just be really proud of what I do and kind of let it go. And but I'd love to hear anybody else's take on that if they have some suggestions for me.
Yeah.
Actually,
Well,
I have I have a suggestion. Sorry to cut you
Great.
off,
No,
oh
Kyle.
yeah,
good.
go ahead,
Um,
jump in.
it's probably not one you want to hear, but it's something I try to tell myself, like, oh, I'm going through this moment. I'm not feeling great. Like, I don't like how I'm feeling, but I know that's going to help me creatively at some point. It's like those lows, we have a lot of those highs and lows, but those lows they're really important
Mm.
because they fuel us creatively, whether we know it or not. We're drawing from that experience at a future point. So I just tell myself that.
I like that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
that's a
Yeah.
great point. Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump over to Shaun. Shaun, how about yourself? How are you dealing with creative fatigue and all of that?
Yeah, so I think that I live, and I think it's probably common with a lot of us, I live in a constant state of either being stressed out that I have too much work or stressed out that I don't have enough work.
There you
Um,
go.
and I think that that's just a thing that maybe we all just wrestle with. I was having coffee with a much bigger composer and was talking about this, and he's like, dude, you just need to learn how to chill. Like if you have like 2 weeks where you have no projects and you spend the entire 2 weeks panicking that you have no projects and you're not resting, and then inevitably the phone rings and then the email starts to fill up and then you're stressed because you have too much work and then you didn't take that 2 weeks off, and so now
Wow, yeah.
you're coming into the new work still stressed. And so I think a big part of growth as I kind of move through my career is just learning to chill, learning to
Mm.
accept downtime as it comes, and then, yeah. And then I also think that I'm secretly the happiest I ever am when I'm stressed with work. So I think
I know, it's
Yeah.
so bad. Bad.
Guys are all addicted to it.
Stop it, Kaya.
You're addicted to the chase. Elias, how about you? How are you dealing with everything?
And I would say one of the things that I think are important is it's maximizing the moments where you rest. It might sound silly, but let's imagine you have a hard deadline and you're going to sleep 5 hours. The next couple of days only 5 hours because you got to crank it. Then you got to make those 5 hours count. I mean, like you got to get your eye covers, you got to get the blackouts, blast the
Blackout
AC.
curtains.
Yeah, you have to make those 5 hours feel like you're at the spa. So they count. So they really count. Or a long shower or whatnot. Like, I mean, we get, I understand Shaun as well, because, sometimes you're like in between projects, you're like, oh my God, is this going to stretch more than this many weeks or that many weeks? So I feel like what helps me is, doing that kind of ritual thing where it's like, oh, I only have this much, this much rest I can take, or the one day off, then I'm going to make it count. And that was tough during the pandemic because,
Yeah.
we all work from home or home studios or whatnot. And then for me, a big part of my rest was getting out of my house. And then it was like, Sunday would come in. It's like, oh, I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah, when you
So-
can't leave the office and it's always there and you're just like, I might as well work. And then you forget, like, oh crap, it's like 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And then, you're still working and you're not taking time for dinner. And yeah, you don't realize you're burning yourself out sometimes, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So to wrap, we've thank you for sharing all these amazing stories, but to kind of close things up for our panel, I want to go around and I'm curious, we've been talking about stories, we've been talking about, things that drive stories and what drives audiences and keeps people engaged. I'm curious, I want to go around and just find out what everyone, when we go back to your childhood, what's a movie that you really fell in love with? What was a story that connected with you that really, whether it was an inspiring score, the story was inspiring, the music was inspiring, what kind of something that you just held on to from childhood? And for me, I'll go, I loved E.T. I think E.T. was one of the most beautiful stories to grow up and watch, and then still revisit as a kid, and still makes me cry every time, especially when John does it at the bowl live, and this last 20 minutes. And then also to top everything off, if there's anything coming up that you guys are allowed to share, share your favorite story, but also share what we can look forward to from you guys. If you can share anything, I know we have to respect NDAs and everything, but if there's anything you can talk about. So let's go around the room. Tangelene, is there anything that you kind of look back at fondly, something that really inspired you?
I love all, John Williams scores too.
Yeah.
An interesting one that I loved was the film A Beautiful Mind.
Oh yeah.
A Beautiful Mind.
James Horner.
James Horner. That was like one of my favorite scores when I was younger. I just felt
Gorgeous.
like
Yeah.
it paired so well with like the cinematography too, and the shots. It was just all so beautiful. So
Yeah.
that was a great one. I still love it too. Every once in a while, I'll listen to it.
Oh, yeah, it's one of Ron Howard's best movies too. I love it. It's so good.
It's good. It's good.
Greg, how about yourself?
I'm also gonna give some love to James Horner. For me, some of the earliest films I remember seeing were Land Before Time and
Oh yeah,
An American Tale, and both of these movies, they're animated kids movies, but both dealing with such like heavy subjects and
that's Don Bluth for you,
right.
Yeah.
And Horner's score was for both of those movies was completely like reverent to the depth of those subjects. And so even though as a kid I wasn't probably really registering the deeper metaphors, I was feeling those emotions because he was putting it all there. And so I think those movies had a huge influence on me.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the second question?
If you have any projects coming up that we can look forward to. Yeah.
So I mentioned the game Potionomics. It's coming out. It's for PC and hopefully other consoles. It's going to be out on Steam at the end of the year, maybe closer to Halloween. I don't know yet. We're not quite sure. And then also I'm going to be starting a new Disney series called Pupstruction, which will be coming to. I think you can get the image there.
Pupstruction, yeah.
Pupstruction. So Disney Plus, Disney Junior, things like that. So
awesome.
I'll be working on that with Rob Cantor, by the way, who's
nice.
Yeah, songwriting on that.
Absolutely. So Shaun, how about you? And what's something that you kind of hold on to childhood and anything coming up?
I mean, it's keep the James Horner train going. So I was actually gonna bring up, Land Before Time as well. And I think that I have all these memories. I had the VHS, and I watched it so many times, and every time I remember being so fundamentally uncomfortable and unhappy about it, but then I kept coming back to it, and I think such a big part of that was James Horner, and that fundamental desire to not only tell stories, but to be exposed to stories. And Land Before Time is such a, it's a kid's movie, but it maybe shouldn't be a kid's movie. It's
it is one of the, I'm glad you guys brought that up because it's just like, it is, I remember that very fondly, and I do love that film so much, and it was a big part of my childhood. And I think Don Bluth as a filmmaker, I think people should definitely go back. If you don't watch Don Bluth movies, go back and watch his films. And I remember he always said, like, we never treat children as children, we treat them as human beings, we treat their emotions as real. They know how to process the pain and the sadness, and you kind of have to respect that and not sugarcoat it and dance around it. So, and I think those films which are just not made that much anymore. I know Pixar every now and then will hit something really kind of beautiful and sentimental like that, but it's just that way of going. American Tail too. Yeah, great choices. All right, Elias, are you going to keep us with James Horner?
Yeah, no, I mean, of course, when I was growing, I'm a huge fan of Braveheart. I think Braveheart is a fantastic movie, but more when I was a kid, I think, I grew up in South America, so we would get all sorts of re-airings of Tom and Jerry. And I think for me, it was just like, especially all the big concert themes, one where Tom is playing the piano and, Jerry's like jumping around and doing and the music is so incredibly tight. And I think I remember watching it and be like, well, but this music, like, that I thought it was so interesting that it was so prominent. But I would say, I don't know, my teenage years, probably Alien. When I watched Alien, I was like 12 or so. That was like, this is the real deal. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, those I grew up on I never watched the Saturday morning cartoons I watched were Silly Symphony and Looney Tunes. So those are all mostly no dialogue, just music. And it's just like, oof. I mean, that's just masterclass in scoring. And I mean, the term Mickey Mousing, comes from that,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everybody for sharing all these amazing stories and all this insight. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you, Tangelene, Greg, Shaun, Elias for being here with us.
Thank you, Kaya.
Yeah, thank you. And
yes, thank you. And then thank you to Impact 24 for putting this panel together and helping and collaborating with us. And thank you all for watching. We have more panels in this series at Film.Music.Media.com and on our YouTube page. So go check them out.